We have a few choices to make this weekend. One of those is to do with cannabis. And shortly, I want to share with you an experience that a family member of mine had earlier this year with cannabis. I made a series of videos last year showing how the Ministry of Health had basically lied to the nation about vaccination rates during the measles outbreak. They told the public via the media that the rates were low and they needed to be much higher to achieve the unicorn rainbow fairy sprinkle magic numbers that they claim would give us herd immunity. And those vaccination rates were displayed on the Ministry of Health's website for all to see. But then the not so honourable Julianne Genter, when asked in Parliament about the MMR coverage for certain cohorts, she presented a set of numbers that were very different to what was displayed on the Ministry of Health websites for the public. And in that series of videos, I also showed you that the Ministry of Health presented an even different set of data to the World Health Organization. But these figures for the World Health Organization were totally different to what Julianne Genter had presented in Parliament. And the deception didn't end there, because the National Immunisation Register, which is the nation's database basically for every vaccination administered in this country, well, that showed the numbers were well above what the Ministry of Health required or set for their goals for herd immunity. They were totally different and well above what they'd given to the World Health Organization. So what does this have to do with the cannabis vote this weekend? Well, if your government and Ministry of Health are happy to lie about the vaccination rates, if they're happy to make the COVID-19 antibody testing kits illegal back in April, like I showed you in a video earlier this week, then what else are they prepared to lie and misinform you about? It's not like they ever lied to us about asbestos or saturated fat and sugar. It's not like they ever lied about 1080 or the production of Agent Orange in New Plymouth during the Vietnam War, or the opioid crisis, or statins, glyphosate, or even antidepressants. Could they be lying and misleading the nation about cannabis as well? I'm going to share with you a few clips. Now, I'm not showing you these to say yes, you must vote yes for cannabis. I'm showing you these for two reasons. The first is about how the Ministry of Health are underhanded in how they operate. The second is to show you the economic benefits of cannabis once legalized. And I think this nation realizes that we've had a big hit to our economy and we're a bit poked right now, to be honest. But neither of the big parties have a plan to get us out of this.
Welcome. Why should you vote yes for cannabis? Well, if you don't, you're a fool. And not because you're stupid, but because you will have been fooled. I'd like to show you why. So in New Zealand right now, it's a crime to say that anything is a panacea. It's a crime to say that anything is a universal cure. So when the Ministry of Health's own cannabis expert says that cannabis is potentially a panacea, that expert, that bureaucrat, that pharmacologist is coming right up to the edge of committing a crime, and that's not what they normally do. So we have to ask, why are they doing it in the first place? Why is cannabis potentially a universal cure, Ministry of Health? For overall health maintenance and protection? Good Lord, I've never heard anyone speak like this in politics or academia. What does this mean? Much like aspirin is used to prevent stroke and heart disease in healthy individuals, good Lord, it's like something magical. Because the inside your body, cannabinoid, system is critical to the body's overall normal function, equilibrium, well-being, homeostasis, and influences all of our main organ and tissue systems. So what? Ministry of Health, cannabis expert, you're telling us that cannabis is potentially a universal cure for health maintenance and protection. And you did this in 2008? Now I'm just confused. Why are we being told nothing about this by our regulators, nothing about this by our politicians, and nothing about this by the academics who do the research in the laboratories in New Zealand, in Otago and Auckland? Why are they not telling us that the endocannabinoid system is responsible for our health, for our well-being, for our protection, for our reproduction, for our growth, for our mental health. Why are we not being told that? Because, potentially, 2/3 of Big Pharma's revenues come from the 1/3 of its products that target our cannabinoid system, and they're at risk from a vegetable. That's just a thought to consider.
So I'm going to Oregon State in America to see firsthand what growing cannabis truly looks like at the grassroots level, learning the positive benefits that have resulted from it, and exploring how this directly relates to New Zealand's potential future, as Oregon and New Zealand have an almost identical population, land mass, GDP, and relative geographical position, making them a perfect example for the reality of legalization. Cannabis has countless recorded medicinal uses, such as people suffering with Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, fibromyalgia, insomnia, anxiety, muscle spasms, chronic pain, nausea, and migraines, to name a few. In today's world, with a simple Google search, it is easy to find examples, research, and information on these medical benefits. However, despite these available resources, misinformation about cannabis is still commonly repeated by those who are ill-informed. For example, many may find it surprising that there has never been a single death from cannabis overdose. The same, however, cannot be said for current prescription medication and alcohol, which are the leading cause of literally hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths every year, with cannabis being excluded entirely from this list due to its zero death toll. So now, knowing this information, it is surprising to find in the New Zealand 2016 Drug Index report, cannabinoids, aka cannabis, is estimated having 8 times more harmful effect on community than amphetamines, resulting in $305 million in intervention costs, 19 times more than spent on amphetamines, even though in the same report it repeatedly states the harm of cannabis is far less than that of most substances on the list. It seems the reason for this confusing difference in government spending is due to the quantity of cannabis users. However, this report has made the generalized assumption that the social harm on friends and family for both meth and cannabis are the same, even though their own expert ranking, as well as most of the general public, knows that this is not the case. To top it off, organised crime is estimated to gain 90% of its income from cannabis, with over $214 million of tax being missed every year from these sales. It turns out I am not the first to find out this information. According to a legally obtained informal Treasury report, behind closed doors the government seems to already agree. Which raises the question of what is more harmful, cannabis or prohibition itself. This finished product is then weighed into 1 pound bags ready to be distributed to medical facilities, dispensaries and patients around the state, creating jobs, income, taxes and economic growth all the way through the chain.
So how many pounds of weed will be in this container?
In this container, full, it'll probably be about 50 pounds.
And how many pounds from the whole garden will you get?
The whole garden up there about 300.
And how much do you get per pound?
Depends, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 a pound.
So you could make almost $500,000 off that garden up there?
Yes, about $500,000.
With that type of income, the next question has to be, why does this small town in the south of Oregon grow the largest cannabis plants in the world?
We are in the Emerald Triangle of our country.
The Emerald Triangle lays between 41 and 43 degrees latitude north. This, along with its proximity to the ocean, provides a perfect environment for growing cannabis, similar in many ways to growing grapes and hops. Let's call it the green zone. Now, as special as the Emerald Triangle is, it is not the only green zone in the world. 41 to 43 degrees latitude south lands us smack bang in the middle of New Zealand, the Southern Hemisphere's very own green zone. Combine this with the previously mentioned identical population, landmass, and GDP. This makes Oregon a great example for what the reality of cannabis legalization would look like for New Zealand. Oregon gains the equivalent of 180 million New Zealand dollars in tax revenue every year, generated solely from local sales, as exports are still prohibited due to federal laws. However, even their politicians understand the reality of the situation, and as laws change, Oregon is positioned to become one of the largest exporters worldwide, as green zones like New Zealand will be naturally positioned at an unrivaled advantage to thrive as it grows into an astounding $100 billion industry in the matter of years. which could not come at a better time considering the impending coronavirus world recession. In 2017, there was more than 12,000 jobs that directly touched cannabis in Oregon alone, resulting in $1.2 billion of economic activity. This is excluding any auxiliary businesses that facilitate the industry, like accounting, consulting, real estate, construction, insurance, security, supply chains, or indirect jobs created by the allocation of sales tax. So in summary, New Zealand is estimated to generate around $200 million in tax every year, as well as saving $305 million in intervention costs, creating an extra $500 million per year for the government to reallocate, as well as generating more than 12,000 jobs directly and thousands more indirectly, stimulating much needed income for people and communities in a struggling post-coronavirus economy. It is worth noting this estimate is solely from local industry and does not take into consideration international exports that will be allowed in the coming years as more countries prepare to legalise. The more you search for the effects of cannabis legalisation around the world, one common storyline keeps appearing: economic growth for both governments and communities.
The other thing caught up in this cannabis world is industrial hemp. And again, the Ministry of Health and a wonderful government organisation, insert sarcasm, is MPI, or the Ministry of Primary Industry. And they're doing everything they can, above board or not, to hamstring the industrial hemp industry. In reality, MPI are there to protect big corporate interests. So you think the likes of Fonterra, Forestry, etc. So they protect anyone who's potentially going to be affected by somebody coming in with a new product that will affect their profits. Now, we can buy hemp seed oil, hemp seed flour, hearts, etc. from the supermarkets, but that's just a fraction of what you can do with hemp. But as I said, they're hamstrung by legislation and corporate interests. Now, I produce my own product from hemp oil, and I would like to access the whole plant, but the Ministry of Health say no. And I cannot make a medical claim about the benefits of hemp. But it seems you can if you produce a sugar bomb drink because you've got MPI covering your back. Now, I used to work for the company that make that, and I can tell you that is just sugar. It's not going to protect your immunity, but it's going to send you on a path to diabetes. So that seriously needs to be addressed. But we're not actually voting on legalizing cannabis. Well, not yet anyway, not as everyone believes we are. We're voting on the proposed legalization of cannabis. There are a lot of people thinking, if this passes, then come Sunday morning, we're going to be able to go out, dig a hole in the garden and plant. We're going to be able to put seeds down. We're going to be able to sit around and smoke a joint. That's just not how it's going to be. We're voting to see if we think that legalization should be written into law. So both sides pushing a yes or no vote have actually got their message wrong. Have you noticed how the Prime Minister has remained very silent on her views? She won't discuss it when asked. She's entitled to keep her opinion to herself. But I guess it's a clear case of relying on the nation to vote for a media-driven popularity instead of what she actually believes. Because if she publicly supported a yes vote, I could see half of her voter base disappearing overnight. And given that she's already changed laws to suit herself and for her own agenda this year, she could pass this law overnight without question and without you and I having the opportunity to vote on it. And they did that with the abortion bill. And that was a turd sandwich of a bill, if ever you've read one. Now, there are a lot of people that are going to say that legalization is going to be a train wreck. You'll hear them say that the gangs will just thrive on it. Well, they already do. You'll hear them say that this is just going to lead to people wasting their life sitting around smoking a joint all day. Well, they already do. And people are going to say it's going to lead to harder drugs. For some it will, and it already does. And if you want to have a chat about how meth found its way into this country, you need to go and track down a former Labour Minister for Police and a few senior, probably retired by now, senior people from the Papakura Police Station. People are going to say that there will be more drug drivers on the road and using machinery at work under the influence. Well, they already do. And it's already well documented in the trucking and freight industry. And we already have people who drink during the day and drive constantly. That's regular. They'll argue that the youth will flock to it in droves. They already do. and they already do with alcohol. Remember, we dropped the drinking age to 18. Now, I've worked extensively in the liquor industry, and I've seen firsthand the damage that alcohol does. And if it was invented today, it would be a Class A drug for its mind-altering abilities. And I've seen the supermarket chains bully the likes of Lion Nathan into pricing for profit. So while your essential items like bread and milk and cheese and butter, while they all go up in price, you can guarantee you'll still be able to get a slab of beer for $20. And never forget that the government make a tidy income from taxes on alcohol, and they deemed liquor an essential service during the first lockdowns. You can't go to your chiropractor, you couldn't go to your physio, but instead you could drink your pain away. Cannabis is in our community, just as alcohol is. And sadly, we've got the messaging with it wrong. It's all bad. And yes, it can be the stigma associated with cannabis that is going to be hard to shake off because of the decades of marketing against it. But that's always been the message, and that's what people think they're voting on. But have you ever considered cannabis as medicine? You've just seen that the Ministry of Health have said it is beneficial for our health, even back in 2008. And in January this year, a family member experienced firsthand the benefits of cannabis. Now, this person is in their mid-70s, multiple comorbidities, smoked cigarettes all their life, and they've even survived a brain hemorrhage. But they live comfortably at home, they don't need support. But on a Monday morning in January this year, they were rushed off to hospital with what was thought to be an asthma attack, and they were sent home later that day once they'd stabilised. Tuesday morning, I received a phone call to say an ambulance was on its way, and this person was being rushed back in, unable to breathe. Later that day, they were stable and staying in hospital. A few days later, on Thursday, I received a phone call that evening to say that I needed to come down. When I got there, I had the sharp realisation that this person was not going to see the morning. They'd been diagnosed with stage 4 COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and a lifetime of smoking that's going to catch up with you. And this person had spent 3 days in a chair, unable to lay down because of the fluids on their lungs. No attempt was made by the hospital to remove that fluid. No compression socks were provided, and they had horrendously swollen feet and ankles and calves, and they were blue. And even at the repeated requests of the family, no compression socks were provided. They were in and out of sleep, they were sedated, but no fluids were being administered, and they weren't eating. They were fighting for every breath, in and out. And this is exactly what I walked in to see. They were supplied oxygen, but were regularly given morphine and midazolam. Now, these two drugs are seen as a polite way to, shall we say, ease someone in their final hours, to make it more comfortable. And on a side note, Sweden never locked down their country. They had high numbers of deaths amongst the elderly because of morphine and midazolam, but they didn't use oxygen. They also have euthanasia bills, and one doctor is calling the medical profession in Sweden out for misconduct. Now, we're about to vote on euthanasia as well. You might want to go and read that legislation before you vote. Now, this family member, as the next 24 hours passed, was not improving. They'd made it through the night, miraculously. But that morning, another dose of morphine, which the family had repeatedly asked not to be used for this person because they had reacted poorly to it over a decade earlier, their oxygen levels dropped from 92 to 73 within minutes. That's pretty shocking to watch. They were taken out of the wardroom and put in a private room with a complete nurses station. We were literally watching this person die in front of us because of the treatment being used. And they were removed from the ward, so nobody had to experience somebody dying in the room with them. After an hour, the person stabilised again. I'd said to the nurse if this was the final stages, which had become obvious that it was, because the trusted professionals were doing nothing to provide care for this person, that I wanted to use cannabis and a few other over-the-counter supplements to make it easier and less painful for them. Now, this nurse didn't say no, and she didn't say yes, but she did tell me that in situations like this, that they would like to use it for people because it does provide them with less stress and they sleep through it. So I reached out to a friend who could provide me with cannabis in the form of oral drops. And that evening I gave this person a few small drops of cannabis oil with a large dose of vitamin C, vitamin D and zinc, and I set up a humidifier. 2 hours later, this person was sound asleep, breathing quieter than a newborn. And they slept for 9 hours, relaxed. The next morning, I repeated the dose of cannabis, and every hour I administered vitamin C, D and zinc. And another dose of cannabis was given that evening. And guess what? After a day of rest and being able to begin to cough up mucus, having regular fluids, a doctor that evening attempted to give another shot of morphine. Why? There was no need. The patient was stable. They were not in pain. They hadn't requested it. Neither had the family. I physically had to stand between that doctor and my family member to prevent him from basically killing my parent, because they had done nothing that week to save them. And if you think that's a big statement, on the day of admission to hospital, the doctors waited until after 11 p.m, when all family members had left, to present the ill person with do not resuscitate papers. This person was off their head on morphine and who knows what else. Thankfully, they still had enough of their faculties to tell them to F off. And people wonder why I have disdain for the medical establishment. 4 days later, that person, assisted, walked out of that hospital and is doing fine today, with no relapses into COPD, not even showing any signs of it. The cannabis that was given relaxed them. They didn't light up, they took an extracted oil. They also had it massaged into their feet and temples. It allowed their breathing to regulate and gave their body a chance to rest and begin healing without fighting for every breath. Now, we already have a few big players set up in the medicinal cannabis market. They've invested tens of millions. So that's going to happen irrespective of this vote. But medicinal cannabis is not going to be easily accessible or affordable for those who would benefit from it and need it the most. And when you look at getting into the medicinal cannabis industry, you need a variety of licenses. And one of those is a medicines license to produce a product. Now, they've priced it all out of the market for the small family-owned businesses, like we've seen with the boutique artisan craft beers or rums or gins. But the government are telling you that they see cannabis as a medicine, because if you want to manufacture something with it, you need a medicines license. But when you read the proposed legislation for legalization, you find that you'll be able to grow up to 2 plants with a maximum of 4 plants per household. Growing plants under this proposed legislation will give you the opportunity to grow your own plants in your own garden for your own personal use without the fear of prosecution. You'll also be able to share up to 14 grams of dried cannabis or its equivalent with another person aged 20 or over. You can help an ill family member, like someone who lives in a rest care facility, for example. They can use it as medicine, and so can you. You don't need to smoke cannabis. You don't need to get high from it. There's plenty of ways to not get high, but benefit. You can use it as a topical pain relief or a suppository for abdominal or spinal pain. It's an absolute game changer for endometriosis or anyone who suffers with sciatic issues and prolapse discs. You can juice it. You can make a cup of tea with it. You can eat it raw. You can put it in a salad. You can do all of that without getting high and impairing your cognitive abilities. There are many uses for cannabis that will not alter your state of mind. But you don't hear about that, do you? And you can find out how to make it all on YouTube. You just have to go get over the stoner mentality that goes along with the videos. But you'll be able to learn how to use cannabis as a medicine. The things you can treat with it are endless. Now, just take a look at this story. This is a clip that mainstream media would not touch.
22-month-old Ahurewa has an extremely rare form of leukemia. Her chances of survival are around 50-50.
When you hear the survival rate, you just, I guess you kick into protective mode. I mean, you know, what parent wouldn't fight for their kid?
Chemotherapy was presented as the only hope. but the Rapira whānau needed breathing space to consider their options.
We got told that, oh, you know, you're here and we're going to run chemotherapy and it's going to start at this day, and we're like, not yet. That's not what we want to do. Like, we want to have a thought, we want to have a conversation, we want to understand what this actually is, just to make sure that this is the right choice for our baby, you know. And so we got to a point where we were like, oh, we don't believe this is the right choice and we're going to go home.
Was there a chance of softening the blow of chemo? Brad began researching medicinal cannabis as a complementary medicine, but that met with resistance.
One of the doctors said to us, cannabis doesn't belong in the baby, you know, and I says, cancer and chemotherapy don't belong in a baby.
The whānau, this is day 8 of Ahurewa's chemotherapy. And look at her, she's up, full of energy, wanting to build and do her thing. 9 days into chemo whānau, she's ready to go. So here's day 10, last day of her chemo. She's done incredibly well.
At Starship Hospital, Ahurewa has just finished her first round of chemo. She was also treated with medicinal cannabis. For Brad, the results speak for themselves.
It's been amazing. It's been amazing to watch what hasn't happened to her. You know, the doctor says this is going to happen. She's going to get sores in the mouth. She's going to lose her appetite. She's going to be nauseous. She's going to vomit quite a bit. And then we'll eventually put a nasal feeding tube into her so that, you know, we can get the right nutrients and everything into her. But none of that's happened.
And this is what her dad had to say a few days ago on a live feed on Facebook.
Our daughter would have went through a horrendous regime of chemotherapy here in Starship. It was still pretty horrendous, but we know that while she was on the cannabis medicine, the side effects that we've seen her go through and the reality of most of the other children, and bless their hearts, on the ward, there was a whole lot of suffering that Ahurewa didn't have to go through.
The people involved in helping this family through their daughter's cancer have been inundated with requests for help following this video from hundreds of families around the country. So why are we not hearing of this in the major media outlets? Is it because the advertisers on these outlets stand to lose billions if the public could work out that cannabis can actually use to treat illnesses and disease? This proposed legislation paves the way for that to become reality. It gives us the ability to control our health. And we're a chronically ill nation. You sit in any food court and you see how ill we actually are. We are the sickest species on the planet. And we're the only species that willingly inject ourselves with toxins and swallow them as well. How many people do you know live with chronic pain and illness? How many people do you know are on the hamster wheel of the modern medicine machine? They become ill, they get a prescription. Soon they develop new symptoms, more prescriptions, more drugs, more symptoms. And soon enough, that becomes their life. I've seen it countless times. And a great example is to look at anyone who's struggling with stress, anxiety, or depression. It literally is a lolly scramble of drugs thrown at them by the perceived experts in health. But how easy would it be to manage your anxiety and stress and your own mental health by growing a plant? How great would it be to manage your pain without harmful opiates? And how great would it be to sleep through the night without toxic sedatives? How would it feel to live in good health and not in a constant state of dis-ease? Now, it will be a long time before medical cannabis is easily available and affordable for those who need it. But this proposed legalization bill will give those people the opportunity to make their own medicine. Consider these things before you make your decision. Ask questions. You still have time, because your government and the big pharma-funded medical establishment surely would never lie to you about cannabis, would they?